Justin and Jim Duncombe, and I'm grateful to have them on today talking about college affordability. So Justin and Jim, thanks so much for coming on. Greatly appreciate your time today.
You're welcome.
Thank you for having us.
Yep.
So we have mainly guys, millennials that listen to this show from the age range of 18 to 35 years old. So I guess you could even put the Gen Z crowd in that too.
Yeah.
And they're all going into college, or they've completed college. They're doing their master's, PhD, maybe law school. And with the people that are listening, you talked to me about, while we were talking earlier on in the week about at this conference, about the top 5 mistakes that families make about applying to colleges and their education in general. So can you guys discuss that?
Sure. Probably the first one that people make is they don't do the application in the first place. And it sounds crazy. And a lot of that has to do with the assumption around college already being expensive and people can't actually afford it. And so, you know, if you look at a family that makes $100,000, if they're going to an Ivy League, they're only going to pay around $5 to $7 grand per that school. But if you don't do the financial aid application, the school's just going to charge you the full amount. So I've known several families that while they were going, they didn't do their financial aid applications at the beginning and they didn't qualify for anything because they didn't do it. But as soon as they do the application, all of a sudden they find that their school significantly drops in price, especially if they're at a private school.
You know, we did a program a couple of years ago, more than a couple, I guess now, for Clark County School District. And their big issue they wanted to talk to us about was not enough families filling out the application, because a lot of them said, look, they're low income families. They're just going to get this financial aid. Well, how's the school going to know to give you financial aid? They don't know what your finances look like, right? I mean, it sounds like common sense, but you'd be surprised how many people just assume, right?
Clark County, you guys are in Nevada then, correct?
Yeah, we did a project for a guy we knew. He was getting the financial service business. This was an area for him to grow his practice. And so we came out there. He had connections, and we did 42 schools there? Something like that?
I did 42 schools. We're actually in Phoenix, Arizona, and Southern California. We actually go around and do presentations at high schools around the country. So at that time, we were in Nevada. We've also been up in Salt Lake City, Portland, Oregon, Seattle, Washington. We've been all over doing presentations for schools.
So well, I guess I should say this, Justin and Jim, what made you want to, start, helping kids with this? Because we know it's an extreme problem. We've heard this in the Democratic primary, in the Republican primary. We've heard this in the Democratic primary and the Republican primary throughout 2020. And obviously this has been an issue before 2020 as far as college affordability goes. But what made you guys want to jump into that realm of college affordability?
Well, the reason we got into it, I started, I left Hewlett Packard. I worked for him for years, and I wanted my own practice. I wanted to do something I like, which was planning. And so, in the financial planning world, because I'm an overall planner, is you're always looking for how do I find clients? And everybody talks about retirement because that's where the big money is, and investing, right? And after a while, and it's kind of funny in the financial service, they say, hey, after 5 years, it gets easier. No, it doesn't. So at 5 years, we're looking around, and I met this guy, and he had a program that he introduced to us about talking to schools. He came out of the Department of Education. He worked for financial planning a little bit. So we said, well, let's talk about that. So I talked to a buddy of mine who was a principal at a high school. I said, hey, we got this topic about how to pay for college, the realities of really what paying for college are, right? And he goes, well, do it at my school. So I did it, and we had like 15 families. Well, fortunately, out of the 15 families, one was a counselor at another high school, and one was a parent of a PAC group, so the Parent Activity Group Committee. And they said, hey, would you come to our high school? Next thing we know, we got 350 families, right? So it just blew up, and it said, well, this is where people want to come talk to you. And that's why we got into it, because we got tired of trying to find clients by going to see what we thought they'd be interested in to looking at an area where they're interested. And my clients alone were saying, hey, Jim, how are we really going to pay for college? And then Justin joined us a few years after that. And since then, we've just been focusing on this to grow our practice.
Why do you guys feel like college has gotten so out of control as far as affordability? Is it the money that the professors are getting paid? We hear that line of rhetoric consistently. Is it just athletics? We see these coaches, and I'm a huge sports fan, I'm going to be honest with you, but we see these coaches like I'm in Florida, University of Florida, University of Alabama with Nick Saban. These guys are getting like $5, $6, $7 million. Obviously, the coach has to be getting paid by the school, and the school's got to get the money from the kids that go to the school. Is that why we're seeing the college affordability gap grow so high? Is that
that's part of it? That's part of it. But when you look at it, you got colleges where you can swim dorm to dorm. You have colleges like UCLA put in a whole facility for Asian students for meals because they're attracting overseas students because they pay full boat. So you have these infrastructures. And then a lot of departments, each department has their own IT department. So they're not centralized in some areas where they can get some more efficiencies. And why should they? They can just pass the cost on, right? So you have a lot of inefficiencies in these schools. Would you agree with that?
I would definitely agree with that. I would go a little further and also, follow the money. So to your point about the sports, a lot of that money, while some of it does come from students, a lot of it's coming from the networks paying for the access to college football or college basketball. It's coming from the sales of the jerseys. And we just saw a big lawsuit come out recently about these schools making money off the likenesses of their students and not compensating for that. They're being compensated for their education, but they're not being compensated based on, hey, you're using this guy's image to help people get to the school. So I think that is to a large degree kind of paying for itself. But when it comes to the school, there's two sides to it. A is follow the money. You have an unlimited money supply in terms of student loans. You can get so when you pay for higher education, if you cannot pay for it yourself, they will give you a loan for as much as the school costs with no limitations. So if you have an unlimited money supply, you can charge as much as you want. So that's one side. The other side of it is, okay, going back to how schools charge, let's look at what the actual cost for a family is. If you make less than 100 grand, these private schools are free for the most part. They make you pay for transportation and books and things like that, but the endowment is actually paying for the school, paying for the kid, assuming you paid for it. So in that case, the school's not that expensive for them. It's really expensive for the middle class and the upper class families and any of the disadvantaged families that don't apply for financial aid that are paying full boat. So if you adjust for how families can pay for school using the system, it's not as expensive as you think, but the list price would certainly make you think so.
For people that are just tuning in, again, this is Justin and Jim Duncombe. They're with College Bound Strategies. We're talking about college affordability and colleges in general. As we go into this, and Justin or Jim, whichever one of you guys want to answer this, you're more than welcome. But we see obviously COVID affected the country in 2020. I've heard a lot through newspapers and news sites in general saying that COVID really affected colleges a lot. Obviously these kids weren't staying on campus, so the colleges were not getting that money as far as the resident's life goes and the boarding. So they lost a lot of money through that. Obviously, a lot of parents lost their jobs. Kids or adults that are going back to school lost their jobs too. Some are getting their jobs back. Some may have to change to other industries. How do you feel like that's going to affect colleges in general, the COVID crisis, and how it's happened already?
It's interesting you say that because we've actually still been able to do some presentations and talks with schools even during COVID, especially using Zoom meetings and things like that. Because just to cover that, we do a presentation for these high schools on choosing higher education. When should you go to college? Is college right for you? Maximizing the majors when you do go to college to make sure that it's worth it. And beyond that, how you pay for it, how you apply for it. So that's kind of what our presentation discusses. So when we go to these schools and we talk with these families, this past year with families not being able to send their kids to school, with some of these kids actually themselves getting really concerned about the affordability of college, as well as I'm not going to be able to get that experience if I go to campus. A lot of these kids deferred. So this past year, you had a significant drop in the number of students who were even going to college because they weren't getting their experience. And now that you're looking at it on the tail end, okay, some of these schools, I think Harvard this past year said they weren't going to accept any on-campus people, even with a full year of supposedly vaccinated kids or kids that were relatively immune to the disease, and people that had mostly been vaccinated. So, okay, you're paying this gigantic price tag, again, assuming the price tag, not assuming what the discount may be, and you're not getting to be on campus or with the professors or enjoy the experience of this lovely campus and location, and you're still paying the same price.
Right.
Why? So you have that. You also have an increasing concern around, is college worth it? I mean, you see a lot of people, the joke is, you have certain degrees and studies that end up, the best place you're going to work for the first 10 years is Starbucks. It's like, so those kind of concerns are becoming really genuine, is when is education worth it?
Well, Justin, that's what, I was talking about at the beginning of the interview. I went to college my first semester. They put you with any Joe Schmo advisor that they can put you with. And the guy was acting and he said, oh, you would be a good actor. And then I went into political science and communications, which is what I wanted to do. And that advisor said, why is that guy telling you that? What do you want to be? A tree for your whole life, or in a play, or, do Romeo and Juliet, which is true. You can't get any money off working and acting. You got to be really lucky and, hit the right person at the right time to get that right audition. So it's a total joke. So, to go into that, what do you tell these parents to look for when they find they feel like the right school? To make sure they don't make that mistake that I did for one semester, going with this Joe Schmo that just wanted to build up his own acting program and really didn't give a damn, in plain English, about myself and and how I was going to adapt toward college and getting that right fit as far as a major for me.
Rob, you bring up a good point, but it actually starts in high school. Okay.
Right.
In high school, most schools do a program called Naviance. It's really it's a testing where you find out what your aptitude is and things you might like to do. And it's pretty broad, right? Mm-hmm. And then as you go along, you narrow down. The problem that you have is with high school counselors, only 17% of their time is spent on helping students go beyond high school. The rest is, what was the family problem? So you don't have anybody focusing on it. And there's a lot of organizations out there. We used to have one where we had a private outside counselor who would actually focus in on helping your student understand where their aptitude is, what they really want to do, and really the field they should have studied. And then they go off and say, okay, out of that, here's the group of schools, right? And of those, which one are best fit for you? Should you go to a big school? You're the kind of kid who doesn't care about talking to people. Like my elder son, he's a computer guy. He didn't care if he was 400 people. He wasn't going to talk about anything. Justin was the opposite. He was like, I'm going to talk. If I have a problem, I'm going to raise my hand and yell at you. So he wanted to school with 25, 30 kids, right? So it's a different in learning environment. That experience helps you get more out of education. So if you take a look at the environment you want, that kind of nails it down. And they don't do a real good job at that. So I would encourage a lot of people, look what your resources are, either through the high school, and you got to push them squeaky wheel, right? It gets degrees. So you be the ones banging on the counselor's office. I want to talk, go that way. Or you hire somebody outside who's an expert that help you do this kind of stuff in terms of choosing the right school and career.
Now, let's say you're a millennial and you're in undergraduate or maybe even graduate right now, and you're thinking about this. There's other resources you can do. And okay, you're in your first couple of years, or maybe even your third year, but you're not sure that what you're doing is going to pay for itself, or it's what you should really be doing. There's a program on the College Board website. I believe it's called Big Future. It's basically the same thing as Naviance. In fact, a lot of schools are now using College Board's Big Future program instead of Naviance because I think apparently it's less expensive. And by the way, College Board is the same organization that does one of the financial aid applications, and they also do the SAT. That's who this is. And so this program will let you it'll ask you questions about your personality, your temperament, different subjects you respond to, and it will actually help you focus in on different topics that are things that you like. And so then it's down to, okay, marrying things that you like and things that you're good at. And so, because there are some things that people really like, and you see them all the time. You watch America's Got Talent. You see this all the time. They really like something, but they're not that good at it. And so there is a marriage and a thing between passion and opportunity, things you like and things you're good at, and trying to marriage those to create a opportunity for yourself coming out of school.
Well, my question is for Jim. So Jim, we're seeing right now with, a lot of schools, I guess, are going away from SATs there, and even the ACTs, they're going away from that. and they're looking at, kids more broader resume, what they did in high school, did they work? How are you adapting these kids as far as now with that kind of change, as far as, some of these schools are not depending on those SATs and ACTs?
Well, actually, the schools never did just depend on those test scores.
Right.
That's an objective measurement. And that comes and goes. I mean, there was a few years ago where some of the schools had dropped SATs and ACTs, and now all of a sudden you're accepting kids in very subjective manners, right? But when you're looking at a kid filling out an application, all the other things come into play. Like for example, if I'm an Eagle Scout, boy, is that a big bonus to a lot of people, or stars for the Girl Scouts, Gold Stars. And the issue there is they want a well-rounded student. So did I volunteer in the community? Did I actually take a leadership role? If I was on a sports team, was I a captain, co-captain? If I was in any of the clubs, whether it was, the clubs around the school, was I an officer, because it shows leadership. You already had that built in, okay? And so, I mean, because Justin had a case. Tell them the case about your situation with a friend of yours in high school where they were top of the class.
So one of our students, this guy was one of the top couple kids in the entire class. This guy could sleep through a calculus class and still ace the test. He was one of those kind of kids.
Disgusting.
So this guy applied to pretty much all of the best schools that you could think of. And he got rejected by 9 out of 10 of them.
Wow.
And the reason he did is because as much as he did good, he did a great SAT, great ACT, aced pretty much everything sleeping. And he still got rejected because he didn't have a complete application. He didn't participate in community programs, leadership, any of the service hours that they wanted to see on the applications. He wasn't any different, because when it comes to high profile students that have high SAT, SAT, ACT, any of these things, even if you're really good, you're not unique. If you look at a school like Harvard or NYU or UCLA, which is it's a state school, there are tens of thousands of kids that look just like you. So how do you differentiate from that? It's the profiles, it's the essays you write, it's the activities you've done, and all those kind of things.
Free college was a huge topic in 2020. With that said, can you talk about what your opinion is on free college as far as taxpayers? Just obviously the taxes would go up, but college would be K through 12. It's free already, not technically free, I say, because we pay tax money to these schools to pay for it, but we'd also be paying tax money to the colleges as far as state colleges, to get them as far as free too. So
I'll tee this up a little bit, only because Justin really likes to get into this, but so let me tee it up. First, you have to say, who are they looking for to make college free? When you already have disadvantaged families, and you have these systems that are set up already that already get it free. So low income families, college from state schools and community colleges is already free. So who are they now really targeting? They're really targeting having the upper middle and rich people now get money paid for their tuition. And I'll let Justin pick up on this, because he's really got some great stuff, and we've really thought about and worked on this a lot. So it's interesting if you think about it from a couple different perspectives. So let's first think about what Jim mentioned. So from the students let's talk about the students who already have student loans and they want them forgiven. There is already a student loan forgiveness program. What people don't know about it is when your loan gets forgiven, you have to pay taxes on the forgiveness as if it's income. So let's say they forgive $100,000 of student loans. They're now going to, assuming they don't change it, so this is a secondary consideration they'd have to include, because under the current loan forgiveness law, they would then tax you on $100,000 of income. So you have to pay the taxes on that all at once. So that's $20,000, $30,000 in taxes in that 1 year. You don't get to spread it out. So you went from paying for your loans over time to having to concentrate it. So that's the first concern with saying forgive free student loans. As Jim mentioned, it's already free for disadvantaged students. So if you are now trying to pay for it for everybody, okay, 75% of all students try to get some sort of higher education. 40% of the entire students get something bachelor's degree and above.
So that means 60% of all the students either didn't go to any higher education at all, or didn't at least finish with a bachelor's degree. They have a vocational or a technical degree. Okay, so if, as you mentioned, taxes would have to go up. So that means you're now making the 60% through their taxes pay for the education of those who have a better degree than them in all likelihood. So let's say you have a blue collar working in a factory and they got a CNC certificate, or they have a certificate for programming these machines. Well, they didn't have to pay for that, but through their taxes, they're now paying for the education of the guy who probably has a college degree that's their boss. Isn't that kind of unethical to make a blue collar worker pay for the education of the white collar worker?
I hear you, Justin.
Yeah, so those are some of the concerns there.
Just to interrupt, and sorry about that, but just the two quick pushbacks. The pushback on that is we all do pay for K through 12 too. So, you know, what would, you know, I say I went to private school my whole life. So my parents still pay for K through 12, even though they didn't send me there. You know, we all pay for the fire department, the police department, even though we may not use them in our lifetime, maybe we will use them. So what would you say to somebody that says that stuff there too? So that blue collar worker is also paying for that stuff that they may not use, but those are just services.
Yeah, we were just talking about that before we came on air. And if you look at it, you go, okay, so I'm going to get this free education, and the cost is going to be spread across a number of different people, right? And now all of a sudden you're saying, well, it just slipped my mind. Pick up on that.
Okay, so
slipped my mind on that. My point.
That's okay.
So I think where Jim is going with this is, well, actually, say that again really quick, just to refresh me. Just if you could.
Yeah, not a problem, Justin.
So on the paying for on the public side. So
right.
If you look at education from the 60s and the 70s, the U.S. was in the top, 5-10% in education quality. Since it became federalized and concentrated, we've slipped into the 30s and the 40s. So by making it a public service as opposed to a state and local service, we've actually lost a significant quality step in our higher education. So much so that you look at areas like Florida, Texas, Arizona are going to significantly greater free choice. They're going back towards giving families the freedom to choose where their tax dollars are going to pay for their education or whether they should use it at all. Now, you may actually use the fire department or the police department, and you do benefit them because they stop your neighbor's house from catching the entire city on fire.
Right.
You think of the Chicago fire. If they didn't stop it, it would eventually get to you. However, if you want to go be a welder or be a plumber and run your own plumbing business, then you're not benefiting in any way from the education of another person, because that person also, you may be in an entire field of construction. Most of those guys don't have college degrees. They're incredibly skilled and incredibly educated, but you're not benefiting. So they're not in the same vein. And so you have situations where by making it more concentrated, we actually lower the quality. So if we have so many localities trying to make it free again, why would you put college on a track that's 40 years behind that, where it goes in the same track of getting worse, and then you have to open it up again when we already know that's what had to happen and is happening right now with junior highs and high schools?
Yeah, and when something is free, it loses value, right? If you have to earn it, work for it, makes it a little bit better. And Justin did answer the point that I was going to bring up about it. So,
well, I agree with you guys, and I said this already. The education system, as far as public schools, is extremely bad in this country for the most part. Obviously, we do have some areas where there are good public schools in different states, of course. And I agree with you. I went to private school, like I said, my whole life was throughout K through 12 and even in college. So, you know, it'd be nice, like I said, if my parents didn't have to pay taxes for schools that they, you know, I wasn't using. But the thing that I get to where, and like I said, I agree with you, but the thing I do get to with this is if I'm not paying and I'm not using the schools, like I said, but I'm still not paying for it. And, you know, a lot of people are choosing charter and private schools right now. And like you said, throughout COVID, obviously that money is not coming in to those schools, that tax money for those schools. So those schools that are already decrepit are going to increasingly go down. So then my question for you there is, Justin, is what goes with that? You know what I mean? Because you're not getting that revenue. Those schools are going to keep getting worse. And then what happens to the kids that are in those disadvantaged schools when the teachers say, hey, I don't want to work here. This place is a dump. It's a dive. And they say, I could go work at a private school and I may get paid, less, but maybe I deal with better kids that are more respectful. Maybe I don't. Maybe the pay is better. Who knows?
It's interesting you say that, because if you look at places like California and New York, they already have the most expensive school systems and they're among the worst. So they clearly don't need more money, because the more money they've gotten worse faster than everybody else. So why is it that you can have places like Arizona or Florida or Texas or any number of a couple other dozen states that have better education outcomes and they spend far less on it? So I think money isn't the only problem. But the other side of that is, okay, let's look at New York City.
Yeah.
New York City was having exactly this problem. They were throwing money at it. They were still going down the drain. So what happened? Back in the late 2000s, you started having a program where they started opening up to vouchers. You started having private schools, being able to have these families from disadvantaged areas, predominantly Black families, because the community that wants the most education flexibility are Black moms. So they're the highest degree that want this. And so they started getting the ability to have that choice of, should I continue to send my kid to the local school that I don't trust and think is doing them a disservice, or can I send them to a charter school? They overwhelmingly started up charter schools, and they started popping up everywhere in New York. And you started seeing substantial improvements in grades and test scores and graduation rates. So we've even had it in a microcosm of a place like New York where it really started to work. So when de Blasio got in, the first thing he did was cancel it.
And that made no sense. I mean,
so it's like,
I'm not a de Blasio fan. I agree with most of your points. I'm just saying that to go with Florida, I've worked in the educational system down here. I do teach. I just do this on the side and make some extra money. But working in the school systems there, it's a travesty there. I disagree with you there that it's great in Florida. It's really bad. There's teacher vacancies galore, not just through COVID, even before COVID, going back to 18 and 19 when I was in there.
I'm just talking relative to California and New York. That's
that could be true.
So I'd like to bring something else up that I think really hits your target market. Both my sons are millennials.
Yeah.
And my older son, he's got 3 kids.
Right.
So us knowing how the system works, and we'll explain that in just a moment, is that, how do I now, as a millennial, I know cost of college is expensive. I don't see that really going down. I may not understand, and most of them do not understand how the system actually works, which is our expertise. But how do I plan for my kids or my grandkids' education, right? So what's important for millennials to understand is you need to understand how the system works. It's been this way for 50, 60 years. I don't see it change. All this stuff they talk about in Washington, the bottom line really isn't going to change on this stuff, right? But so where should my assets go? Where should I invest my money to make sure that my kids and my grandkids can go to school, right?
So what do you suggest? I hear a lot of these 529 funds. Do you believe that that's good? We were talking about that last night with someone about investing, but that was mostly the stock market and stuff like that. But what would you do? Are those 529 funds good? Would you rather put your money in the stock market? Savings accounts right now are a total joke because there's no friggin' interest in plain English. I mean, if you get a 0.5%, you're lucky. It's like a big deal. So what would you guys do as far as saving money for, millennials or even the millennials kids when they do have it?
I'm teeing that up for Justin. We just talked about it before the show.
Let's first look at, do you have to save / how much before you talk about how should we save? So let's say we got and I'll use some real people here. Single mom, dad passed away. She's a teacher. She doesn't have one of the advanced degrees, so she makes $90,000. It's a real person. Wants to go to Caltech is what the kid wants to do. And that school, $70,000 a year school, When you account for mom's income, annualized cost, $5,000. That's it. The average cost to have a student per month is about $1,000. When you account for food, driving to and from school, all that kind of stuff. So it costs about $10,000 to $12,000 a year. Now your college cost all in is $5,000. You're going to save money going to college. So you don't even need to save if you're in that kind of scenario, assuming you have a kid that is accomplished enough to open those kinds of doors. Now, let's say if you have that kind of income and your student isn't that accomplished and, is probably going to be more towards a state or a vocational school. Well, then there you're looking at, $10,000, $15,000 a year when you account for, in that same income, the federal and state assistance that comes into play in most situations. You're talking in most situations, $10,000 to $15,000 a year. Again, we're still at 10 to 12 per year in terms of that student being away, assuming they go to college and go away, that's just to make the numbers consistent. So then we still only have to deal with $4,000 extra per year. So now we have to only save $15,000 total to send a kid to college when you account for how you pay for it.
But wouldn't you be worried? Sorry to interrupt you, Justin. Wouldn't you be worried about inflation right now?
So say you want to account for that, add to account for 10 or 20 years, add 10 to 20% to account for total inflation. So now instead of, 10 to 12, maybe 20, but that's still, so say you have a young kid, you're a millennial, you have a young kid, 5 or less, you have 15 to 20 years to save $20,000. You can do that because keep in mind, if the school cost is inflating, your income will inflate behind that a little bit, and especially over time. Look at the 80s, you saw 10, 15% pay raises when inflation was, especially in the early 80s when it was kind of out of control. So it kind of generally keeps pace with itself. So your income goes up, the cost of school goes up. So the relative costs relative to each other are comparable. So the numbers may be different, but the relative proportions of your income, relative proportions of what it costs to raise a kid compared to these other things is still pretty much the same numbers.
But to back up just a little bit on that. So Justin's point is, if you know what it's actually going to cost you for college, then you're not looking at this $270,000 bill that they throw out there. It's going to cost you for a 4-year school at a good school. You're really looking at a much lower number. Well, how do you get to that number? You have to understand that when you fill out your application for federal student aid, some assets you have count against you and some do not. Okay. So assets that don't count against you, like retirement plans, that's a good thing. Assets that do count against you are things like 529 plans, are things like your normal savings and investment accounts. So you got to think about, so if I'm a family now, let's say I'm a millennial that is making really good money. Okay. Let's say I'm making $250,000, $300,000, $350,000 a year. I got 3 kids, right? And all of a sudden, how do I put money away? Well, maybe you want to invest that money in the market, not worry so much about the 529, or put a lesser amount of 529 money away and put that money into an investment account and let the earnings off of that account. And if you do it right, and we've done a pretty good job with our clients, but let's say you do it right. You let the earnings off of that account pay for that college education for the kid. Yeah, it may not be the 4 or 5 years the kid's going. Maybe it's going to take 8 years. But now you got that bucket of money that you were planning on spending for college. Let it actually pay for that college education, and you still have that bucket of money.
And it comes back to this. So 529s are great, especially if we're talking, say we only need to have $10,000, $20,000 from the previous example. That's kind of doable over that time frame. And you do get tax deferred benefits, so it grows. You don't have to pay tax on that money. So in that frame, 529s are a very useful subject. Let's say a family makes a lot more money, so they can put a lot of money away. And because they make more money, the school for their kids will be more expensive. So let's say they're up in the high 100s. Your cost of school then is in the 30s and 40s at a $70,000 a year school. It's still not full cost, but it's still substantially higher. So if we account for the per cost student, we're still about 30 grand a year. That's going to be a big chunk of our assets if we do have big savings. So you have 2 basic options. We can save a big pile of money and then spend it all. And that would be the 529 option. You're saving all this money, but you have to spend it on education. The other option you have is, because all your 529s are actually counted as one big asset. So the savings for your oldest kid and the savings for your youngest kid all count against the oldest kid. So if you have 529s, they all count against the first one that goes. So it's all treated as one big pile of money anyway. So if you think of it that way, if I use this income stream method that Jim was mentioning, then that asset still exists after it's done paying off the student debt. So you may use student loans, it may pay over time, but that's a way to preserve it if you've built up a big amount of money. So you do have different options depending on how you want to do it.
To clarify, so the 529 I was told is that if you have 3 kids, you can move it around. You don't need multiple 529s. You can just put a big chunk in. Okay. So why would you take out student loans though, Justin, if you were, you know, making good money and you put enough into that 529, or if you put it in the market like Jim said, why would you need to? Go ahead.
So a 529 is actually in the market. It is invested. So we're not talking about one versus the other. It's basically how you pay for it is what we're really talking about. So a 529 is a specific investment account that defers the tax. I don't have to pay taxes when it grows, as long as I use it for education. If I don't use it for education, I have to pay taxes and a 10% penalty on top of that. Yeah. So the investment side of things is there on both sides. What we really want to talk about is how you use that money to pay for education. So let's say we save up 300 grand. Now, you're right. You could just use one 529 and split it. But let's say you got 2 kids that overlap a little bit. So they're like only 2 years apart. So they're going to college at the same time. Well, if the 529, we only have one, is in the name of one student, we can only use it for that student. It has to be the name of the beneficiary for the 529. So most families have to split them to 2 different students. So the financial aid application does not distinguish that. They still count it as one, but they need to be 2 if you want to use it for 2 students. So that's the first part on the 529s. In terms of how you use it, let's make it equal here. So let's say our family has really high income. So we're going to have to pay pretty much full boat for school. Let's just make the numbers easy, 50 grand. So it's 200 grand per student. So say we've saved up 400 grand and we can actually cover this. That's only 3% of Americans, by the way, that can do that, but let's stay with it. If we have 400 grand at current interest rates, that's like 3 or 4%. Interest rates are going up. So let's just use 4% as a number. At 400 grand, that's 16,000 bucks per year. Well, that's at 200 grand, you're kind of keeping pace with what your student loans are. So if you wanted to have that investment pay for the student loans, it's not touching your income. So the investment is just using its interest and dividends to pay off the student debt. And when it's done doing that, you never used your income and the asset is still there. You lost some of your investment, but the investment paid for itself. So you still have that 400 grand. If you use the 529, the whole thing has to get cashed out and spent.
Yeah. Otherwise you have penalties or you're going to give it to an agent. But to your point, you say, why would I do loans if I have this pool of money built up? Why would I still do that? First off, I like skin in the game. I want my kid to work. I want my kid to maybe do some loans because when they're now in class, they're paying for some of that. Okay, because all of us had the experience when we went to college of the kid who was totally paid for and he didn't really pay attention to school because he didn't need to pay for it. And then you had the other kids who worked their butt off because that was their money. So let's look at it this way. So let's say I have a kid, I do have some need based. So now I'm eligible for the Stafford or direct loans. Okay. Now part of that direct loan, because I'm need based, I have some need in there, is interest free until I leave school plus 6 months. So let's say I have this 529 plan. I get this loan. I now have free use of money while I'm in school. And when I graduate, I take some of that 529 money and I just pay off that loan. What did I just do? I had 4 years or so of money that I had for 0 interest. Is that not good use of your money? Right? Yeah. Because I got 0 interest for that period of time. Right? So that's an incentive.
So Jim, let me ask you this. What about Pell Grants though? Because we never really haven't brought that up yet.
Just to jump in on that one, it's actually, we did mention it a little bit. So remember I mentioned before, you're a disadvantaged student, but they get 5,800 bucks. That's the Pell Grant.
That's Pell Grant.
Okay.
So a Pell Grant actually for any family that is need-based, the Pell Grant covers any community college for the most part, because community college costs about 4 or 5 to 6 grand. So the Pell Grant covers right in there.
So then why, I guess what I would say is why, and this is I want to go back in the interview for sure about this. because we have a lot of people that are for the free college stuff. So
Mhm.
why are we still having people that are politicians come out and say we need free college when it seems like the strategies by you that were developed by both of you guys, Jim and Justin, again, College Bound Strategies, definitely check it out. And we'll go more into that in a minute. Why are we still hearing these free college, student loan forgiveness? Is it because, they're just looking for votes? Because it seems the way you guys explain it, it's fairly affordable.
Well, I think in a lot of cases, when you look at education, actually paying for education, a lot of our politicians are totally ignorant on the topic. They don't know. I mean, if you look at financial advisors, so for example, we did a presentation in front of the CEO, all senior vice presidents of this one financial firm, right? And so we did our presentation because they were looking at, we love this, the way you're marketing this program to reach out more clients, right? So we went through the whole thing, explained how the system works, and then we asked the question, how many of you people just realized that you overpaid for college? And almost every hand went up. Now, these are people that are, they're CEOs and vice presidents and all this of financial firms, because they don't understand it. Because what do they focus on? They focus on 529s because they're collecting the asset and they make money in the collection of the asset. Our practice is more about how do you pay for college? Because then if we know that families trust us with their educational for their children, they're going to trust us with their other assets too. So we got a little bit different mindset. But that's kind of what the big financial firms are all about, 529s, because they're collecting that asset and they're getting a fee for that asset.
Yeah, they don't, no one talks about how the system actually works. You look at any of your news and your talk shows, everyone always focuses on the high cost of college and the rising rates of the high cost. They don't actually approach how families actually pay for it, which is what we're trying to change. Right. And so when you look at it, I'm sure some of it is about getting votes, but it's also they're trying to solve a situation without actually looking at what the problem is. And so if you're looking at just the cost instead of what families actually pay for it, well, then you might have that assumption. But if you look at the average student debt for undergrad, it's 38 grand. That's 1 year. That's not 4. So no one's stopped to think, why is the average debt way lower than the cost of all 4 years? No one's asked that question that I've ever seen on a news program.
Because there's 3 ways that a family gets free financial aid. One is need-based, and it's totally based on your ability to pay. That's your FAFSA. It's also another form called CSS. Second one, merit. It's what I earned. I was a top grade student in my class. I did all this other kind of stuff, right? So I earned a free scholarship or some free money out of the institution. Third, unique ability. I can throw a football. I can shoot a basketball. What if instead of music, I could play an oboe? Okay, an instrument that hardly nobody plays. Or if I'm a girl and I can play hockey, okay, right. #1 sports scholarship. Everybody thinks all these other, no, it's women's hockey for women, and it's men's hockey, and sometimes it changes from year to year. So if you actually look at where free money is and how the institutions look at you, in our program, we break it out. We say, look, you have the tier 1 schools, and again, it's not based on the quality of education, it's how they pay money. There's 138 of these guys. And they'll give you, if you're need-based, anywhere from 100 all the way down to 90% of your education free if you're need-based. Then you have the combination of need-based and merit. Those are the schools that say, I got some need and I also have some merit because you've earned that degree. You've earned something because you got the 4.0 in high school and all this kind of stuff, right?
And you still get need-based.
And then you have the unique ability in different tiers of school, like Division 1s and some Division 2s give you some of that. But you also have to understand when you get into unique ability, sports ones are 1 year at a time. Okay. So you got to look at that. So if I end up getting injured in my sport, I now lost out on it. So when we talk to families, we say, look, if you have a good athlete, that athlete should also be really focusing on education, because if they don't get that, Justin went to his grade school, Division 3, but he had great grades. So he got to play ball and got some free money out of that. So you got to look at how they're going to charge. And if you understand that as your basis point, then all the other stuff will come into play. And then you can plan on where you should put your money, how you should do it. Like my grandkids, I don't use 529s. I use variable universal life insurance. It's just another way of doing it. It's kind of an interesting way. It's a different thought.
So circling back to your original question, if you look at why is there so much focus on free college? Well, one, if you're telling a bunch of young kids that someone's gonna bail them out, that sounds nice. until you think about it for a couple seconds. So let's think about that for just 1 second. Okay, say you got 100 grand and they forgive your student loan. First, you got to hope they also forgive the taxes on that. So that's going back to that original question. The second thing about that is, okay, are they going to raise taxes for this? We already know they want to. At what increase to my taxes am I going to pay more in taxes than I would have paid for my student loans? If you're making 100 grand, it's about 5% or less. So it's not that much. If they raise taxes 5 to 10%, you are now going to pay more for your college than you would have in the first place. And there's no payoff time. It's not like after 20 or 30 years, you paid off your college debt. In this case, you never stop paying. Even when you're retired and you're taking your retirement income, you're still paying the taxes for your college debt. So if you think about it, it's actually not that great a deal, but it does sound nice because no one's actually trying to focus on the problem. And that's one of the things we're trying to change.
A good analogy is think of it as a 30-year mortgage. At the end of 30 years, your house is paid off, right? Now you got a 30-year loan on your college. It's not paid off. You're going to continue to pay for it. And guess what? When you die, your kids are going to pay for it and they don't get that property. So they don't get that equity. And then the grandkids are going to pay for it. So why in the world would we want to take a system where we can pay off that money now and then just annuitize it over generational's time to pay it? It's got to be for some other reason than what's good for the student and for the family. It's got to be.
Sorry to interrupt you, Jim. We're seeing people commit suicide because of student loans or medical bills that just keep going on. And like you said, even if they commit suicide or something, it goes down to the kid and stuff. It's sad and it ruins the whole family. My thing is I just can't believe that people that are lawyers and doctors are gonna, and these are the people that are really struggling, a lot of them with student loans, and they're paying out of their behinds. And it's just because I guess they didn't find you guys first.
We hear that a lot, by the way. We get that a whole lot.
Yeah, but these people are supposed to be extremely smart. Obviously, they're the ones operating on us. They're the ones that are defending us from whatever it may be as far as lawyers. And, they're still paying money, and they could be paying money, like you said, Jim, until they're 50, 60, 70 years old. It's crazy.
But I might be smart as a doctor and attorney, but I may not be smart financially. And a lot of it is just that they just don't know. And that's what we're trying to do, is get this knowledge out to people, and instead of you thinking, my kid's got to go to the school because of cost. What if your kid can make a decision on going to a school, take cost out of the equation, and say, this is the best institution for me with a degree program that's really going to help me make a good living going forward. If you could take cost out of the equation, you're making different decisions.
Yeah. And for the people now, it's kind of a no-win moral argument because, are there doctors and lawyers that have a lot of student debt? Yeah. They're also making a lot of money. So they can, we recently had a guy, he was actually a stockbroker, became a doctor at age 32. Oh, way late in life career change, man. living on Wall Street, doing all that stuff, decides at 30 years old, nope, gotta go become a doctor. Took him till he was in his early mid 50s, somewhere in there, to pay off his student debt. But at the same time, he built a practice. He had a nice house. Like, he had the funds to do it. Did it slow him down? But he's still living a better life than most people. And so, so the flip side of that is, okay, do we want to help those people out? But at the same time, okay, I go back to the previous other side of that. Okay, you have the welder, you have the guy running the CNC machines, you have the woman who wanted to go to cosmetology school and be a hairdresser. They had to pay for those things, and now in their taxes, they're going to have to pay for the education of their doctor and their lawyer while they're also paying their doctor and their lawyer. Right. So which side is more moral there, whether you want to help them out to get them out of debt or you're making somebody else pay for them? There's disadvantages on both sides.
Let's kick this around again. Justin and Jim DeCombe, and they're talking about college again, college-bound strategies. You can see it in the background on the screen when they appear, and it's been on there the whole time. So definitely check them out. And they're doing great work with the community. Obviously,
books on Amazon.
Yeah, the book's on Amazon too. We're going into the community. I know, Justin, you spoke a little bit about this, about the GoFundMe. What made you want to start that? Was that just because you were talking to so many families that didn't know anything about how to save money and they were just struggling? And what we've been talking about throughout the whole interview, people are really getting screwed and losing tons of money paying for college.
Yeah, the big trigger for that for me was when we were talking to these schools in a disadvantaged area, and doing this presentation about the value of higher education, when and where should you go before, and so you get the most out of what you're buying when it comes to higher education, and then how you apply for it, how you afford it, all the stuff we've been talking about. And this school said to our face that we don't think this is right for our demographic. What do you mean by your demographic? Well, we don't think we have a lot of disadvantaged students. We don't have a lot of families that we think would be people that would actually want to use your other services. It's like, okay, then we're donating our time to help this community. We're fine with that. That's part of why we do this. And we still don't think it's right. So this one counselor is blocking off an entire district from hearing the message of, if you're a disadvantaged student, college for you is free if you apply yourself and earn it. And so I thought there was something really fundamentally wrong with that idea. And so the idea actually came to me when I was sitting outside of a Christmas church service. Actually, I was standing in the parking lot and I was like, well, I have this guide. I would obviously love it if, for every family that's looking at higher education, whether they're in it now or they have a kid that's going to go or a family member, I wrote this guide because at these presentations, people would still come to us months later and still make a mistake that we explicitly covered in the presentation. Even though they took pictures of the slides, we explain it in incredible detail. There's even instructions in the FAFSA. They still got it wrong because the FAFSA instructions are kind of confusing and it screws people up. And so I wanted to have some, and the main other thing was this mom came in and she had this big, thick college guide. It was like this, it was a textbook. And these guys are really good. I'm not trashing them in any way, but they try to solve every question that you could possibly come up with for every type of person, which means for any individual, 90% of it doesn't apply. So we focused on, okay, what does our presentation talk about? What are administrators wanting to talk about to their students, the good ones? And let's bring all that and condense it down into a guide that actually guides everybody. So then if you came to the presentation or you just heard us on a podcast or a TV show, you have this resource that you can now get that tells you everything you need to know and then gives you the resources of what you may need to do or where to answer individual questions, those kinds of things. And that's kind of where the guide came from. And so you can get that guide and it will help you. But then the other thought is, going back to those disadvantaged families, what if they can't afford it? I mean, the book is only $13 and change, but what if even they can't afford that? And so, okay, how can we get this message to them if the schools are going to block us? And that's when the idea of, okay, I'm going to start a GoFundMe. Because then if someone wants to donate money to the GoFundMe, I can build up enough money. And because I have a direct relationship with the publisher, I can get them at a discount and directly give them in bulk to different school districts. Now, I just started the GoFundMe. Unfortunately, I started it in COVID, so haven't raised too much money to begin with. But in the first few donations I did get, I donated it to a group that it works with foster youth in Compton in South Central LA. Wow. It was some Black twins. They came out of Compton. They were foster youth. Both of them went and got their educations, made something of themselves. And so they started a charity called Twinspire to reach back into their community they came from and partner with other charities that work with foster youth to try and give these kids the resources to get out of this area where, education isn't necessarily encouraged, where they don't think that they have any resources to get out of their situation. And so they were, because of the size of their organization, they were a great first start to say, okay, let's, max out the money that we already were given and donate all these guides so that way they can give them out to the kids they're working with in high school. So now they literally have a guidebook in hand saying, here's what your options are. Here's how much it's going to cost for someone like you. Because in the guide, it says whether you're disadvantaged all the way up to high income, it tells you relative costs for different schools. So that's kind of where the GoFundMe came from and why I'm so passionate about it.
So where can people find the GoFundMe?
The GoFundMe is on GoFundMe.com. It's under College Bound Strategies, so it has the same name as the book. I've also entertained starting individual GoFundMes for specific school districts. So if someone wanted to open up a GoFundMe for an individual school district or an individual private school or an individual charity, I'd be open to doing that as well if someone reached out to me at justin@collegeboundstrategies.com. But right now I just have the general one, which basically means as I get to different funding levels of several $1,000s at a shot, I can go to different school districts starting in my own area. Or if someone says, hey, I made this donation, can you look at this area, to contact them and say, okay, I'm donating. How many kids do you have that are free and reduced lunch, for instance? And just buy a box and directly send it to them. So they can find that at GoFundMe under College Bound Strategies.
With the last few questions, I know we talked briefly a little bit about the STAR Act. I know you guys are really pushing that. For people that don't know, what is the STAR Act?
The STAR Act is a law that addresses several things that came up when I was doing research for the book. And so, like we said, with the way the current education system works, if you use it, it can be very, very much in your favor. But there are certain aspects of it that we still think are somewhat unfair. For instance, one of the focuses of the 520 of the STAR Act is every individual 529 counts against the one student that goes. So if you have 5 kids and you have 5 529s, all 5 529s raise the cost of the first kid that goes. So even if you qualify for 8, it's going to make that first kid's more expensive, and you're going to start spending them down, and that resource might not be there for kid number 5. So one of the provisions of the STAR Act is to say, treat those 529s as individual assets and don't punish the other kids for the savings of another kid. So it addresses things like that. Another one that we're trying to address is when you have your income in your assessed within the financial aid system, it assesses, all the money you make. But it also adds back in all the money you contributed to your retirement account that year and to your health savings account that year. And it adds it all back in. So if your taxable income says 130 or your adjusted gross income says 130, but you contributed 10 grand to your 401k, it's going to add that back into your income. And we don't think that's right. That should be separate. You shouldn't have to choose between saving for your retirement and saving for college. So that's just a couple things the STAR Act is trying to address in terms of trying to get it out there of there are things we can improve within the educational system, building upon the system that's already there. Because if you drop that retirement savings, for instance, that alone would save you a couple $1,000 on education right there per year.
Yeah, because really, when you think about it, we're set up in our country to help families put money away for retirement so that the elderly are not a burden on society, right? Because that's what happened pre-1930s, right? So we built in Social Security, built in 401ks, IRAs, and things like that. Right. And now, you got this blip, which is really a short term when you think about it, when your kids are going to go to school. And now we're going to penalize you for putting money away. And we think, no, you should be able to pay college out of your taxable income rather than your adjusted gross, so you can take a look at all the expenses you have to pay, mortgages, things like that. And then you got this bucket of money left that you could spend. That should be really available for college. Don't start penalizing somebody because they did savings or they're paying for the healthcare. Let's make it more fair. Is really what that's all about. So the STAR, our local congressman out here in Arizona, Debbie Lesko, we just contacted her office one day and said, hey, and they said, well, we're thinking about something along those lines. Can you guys tell us what you think? Now we gave her a much bigger list of things that we think they could do. Such as, some of the things we would like to see is, well, why should students be allowed to get a PLUS loan for a useless degree? Maybe the loans should be predicated upon areas of study that are important to really growing, like STEM, for example, those kind of degrees. We're not sure that one right now isn't in there, but we'd like to see some of those things. But she was really good about it, and now she's trying to get support through Congress because they have to get a number of Congress people to support the thing, and senators. Ron Paul's on one of them that's also interested in the STAR Act, and we're trying to get some other congressmen. But so your audience, start talking to the people, start contacting your congressman, say, look, what are you guys doing about this? How can you make it more affordable for us?
Yeah, sign on to the STAR Act. That's a great place to start.
Yep. Unfortunately, I don't think many things in Congress will pass, regardless.
That's true. And some of them take time.
It's really sad.
You would think that one's a universal one that people can kind of get behind. So you hope.
There's so many things that are universal that we would hope get passed, but they don't because of nonsense and stupidity in as far as Congress and senators and the president in general. But regardless of that, my question is, is how many, does it have a lot of sponsors? Is it just kind of in the waiting period where there's just trying to establish the legislation right now?
It's just getting out there, because again, different priorities, right?
Yeah.
When they start screaming and yelling more about free education, they can start looking at the STAR Act as an alternative, another way that you can get this education out to families, right?
So it was initially proposed in Congress last year to start circulating for signatures. So it actually is circulating for signatures within the House and the Senate. It was initially introduced last year, but it was right around the time that they were having all the hubbub about impeachment and all that stuff. So not a lot was going on. So right now they are looking at reintroducing it basically in its original form without any amendments to it yet. And they're looking at reintroducing it in the next month or two to start circulating for signatures and support again. So it's coming up. So it is something that as it starts circulating, the more we can get behind it and the more we can get these proposals in there, the more we can try and do. Again, to your point, things are kind of messed up in the House and the Senate and the president right now, but I still don't think that's an excuse not to try, because the more you make of this wave, because the Department of Education, if they really wanted to, they could do some of the things. But if we could get part of it behind doing the STAR Act is it makes it more permanent. Is one of those things where it's harder to change with the different administrations changing things back and forth all the time. It also gets more visibility to the fact that education right now is far more affordable than people think. And even if we can't get the STAR Act in its current form or an amended form through in the next year or two, it will at least help get the information out there that education is far more affordable than we think. And there are alternatives to having free education, especially when for disadvantaged families, it's already free. So it's at least part of getting that information out there, even if the act itself won't get passed, even though I do certainly hope it does get passed.
But again, it goes to, if you're the local congressman, you shoot them an email and say, hey, what do you, and obviously the congressman doesn't read it, their people do, say, where do you guys stand on the STAR Act? And all of a sudden it's like, well, what is the STAR Act? And you get enough of these guys getting pinged with this, what are you doing about it? What's your interest in it? All of a sudden they start looking at it, right? So that's really where things drive through Congress, is what's their level of interest, right? So
I agree 100%. With the last two questions, and I hope everybody does, tell their congressman and senator to at least look at it, and hopefully they'll do something. But that's par for the course of what happens in Washington these days, unfortunately. We'll go with the last two questions. So what do you guys hope the audience learned from this interview, and they learned from the book in general?
Want to start off with that one?
For me, I'd like them to get out of this is that there are ways for you to afford an education and make cost not the primary driver of where you should attend college or your kids attend college. It really should be the degree program they're interested in and what environment is good. I had a client, and well, some friends of ours actually, where a few years ago, their daughter wanted to be a nurse and she decided she was going to go to Oregon. I said, hey, we'll help you out, figure out if that's the right choice. Like, I know we got this thing covered. Well, she went to Oregon, found out it was a commuter school, not really a 4-year school, so it wasn't going to have the experience that she wanted. And she also discovered that it rains a lot in Oregon. It's something you would think about. Right. So sometimes we talk to families, when Justin was looking at school, he was looking at New England for a lot of schools were after him for baseball. We took him to New England in January. Okay. You
thought I'd hate snow.
It's cold, man. It's cold.
Well, when you think about when you're going to school, you're going to school when the worst weather for that area is, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So we said, hey, you get that experience, and if you make that same choice, because it's important. We don't want kids moving from school to school. When you say the average kid graduates with a bachelor's degree in 5.5 years, it's because they change schools a lot. So we hope that they get out of it that money should not be the only driver. It shouldn't be the primary driver. And if you know how to do it, you can get there.
And from there, it goes back to, now that cost isn't the issue, get the education that will be the best future for a student, that provides not only a way to pursue an opportunity, but pursue a passion, and not maybe even not a passion that you already have. Maybe you find a passion in the process that came out of an opportunity, but you at least now have more flexibility to do this. And that's what we want out of the guide. We want the guide to give families these options to have more education options, because now they realize it's more affordable than they think, and give them the resources to do that.
Yep.
Well, you're doing a service for a lot of Americans, and I know a lot of Americans probably, after they see this or hear about you, they wish they got the guide a long time ago. Again, College Bond Strategies, definitely check it out. It's on Amazon, correct?
Yep, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Lulu.com, anywhere books are sold.
All right. Again, College Bound Strategies. And Jim and Justin, thanks so much. I really appreciate your time. Again, Jim and Justin DeCombe, definitely check it out. Again, College Bound Strategies on Amazon.com. And I think it's collegeboundstrategies.com, correct?
Yep, that's right.
For the
All
website.
right. Well, everybody, thanks so much for listening. And Jim and Justin, thanks so much.
Rob, thank
Hey,
you
Rob.
very much for your time. Really appreciate
All right.
it.